Should we use arrows?
Yeah, okay, so you know the basic rundown. I'm not going to give you all the details, but the aging water sewer infrastructure issue, this is an article from Kansas City. I had it for another talk, so I just thought this was a nice picture. It is a broken water main. And again, the gist of the issues, lack of funds at the federal, state level, the local budget cuts, so there's like shortage in, free floating money all around. There's also the short-term planning. We plan for the next year, maybe 2 years, 5 years, but not for a much longer horizon. And also this issue of out of sight that prevents us from noticing old pipes and leaky pipes and failing infrastructure. And I like this quote: public works do not become issues until they do not work. So until then, everything seems to be fine. We don't really bother. But when something happens, we take notice. So that sort of brings us to what's happening now, and it's been a trend. It's not suddenly, it just happened today. But there's been this ongoing decentralization of decision making. The role of infrastructure in local politics has sort of changed. It used to be a backdrop in the context of other urban issues, civic issues, but now it's coming more and more to the front. There's one study that looked at how political factors influence the public capital stock, and that's just looking at public infrastructure. What do cities invest in? How much train, if they have like built train lines and buses and roadways and public works. So you just take the sum total of how much that whole thing is valued, and they looked at different all the states in the U.S. and political factors, the governors, the environment in the state, how fluid was the public opinion against one party or the other. So they looked at all that, and they found that when there is this fluidity in the public and the political structures, the government seem to invest more in public stock. So that's their way of buying favor with the public. So the governments do care in some way by investing in these public stocks. And obviously the converse is true, and there's the stability in decision making. So if you have a like a Republican electorate, Republican government, and a Democratic electorate, Democratic government, so that seems to be the opposing ends, and the in between is sort of this fluid state. There's also another study that looked at, in Florida, they looked at incumbents who lost the elections. And they picked Florida because they have a pretty high number of people who lose elections. So there's like incumbency rate is pretty low, which is not seen elsewhere in the country in local elections. So this study looked at what was the reason, and they found that the positions and the decisions that the incumbents had made on public issues, public works issues, those were seemed to be prominently highlighted in newspaper articles and local coverage. So it seemed, as though based on this author, bricks and mortar issues had given way to had taken the role of taxes and other sort of issues that as a focal point of elections. So there seemed to be this decentralization of decision making, and so it's critical to study how people think and what are the influences that sort of help them make these decisions. And we can talk about it maybe generally, but I have two specific things I want to talk about. One is a national social survey that Cornell did, and we submitted some questions. So we have results from that survey that was done in 2012. And then in addition, we conducted a newspaper article analysis over 14 years that also looked at some specific issues that involve water infrastructure. So I'll take those two as sort of case studies or examples of knowing about some of these topics. But you can ask me questions at this point. So I have sort of this small segment, and then I have these two segments separate, and maybe we can do some questions at the end of each segment. Is that okay? Okay, so this survey is a national survey that's conducted by Cornell. We submitted, I think, 5 questions, only 3 were selected. And a lot of people submit questions. So if this is something that you are interested in on your own research topics, the call is ongoing. So for this year, you can submit your questions. It has a few other research type questions, like why are you doing this sort of things. But you can submit a few questions, and if they get selected, then you get to refine them, and it goes onto the field. So it's the survey is conducted in fall. They use landlines and cell phones. They try to reach 1,000 respondents, and the 2012 survey, the response rate was 18%. It's pretty low, but it's consistently coming down. So that's as good as what you can get right now. 18% is relatively high now. You can see even like 12-15% response rate. So it's definitely going down because people don't want to pick up phone calls from telemarketers and other companies. So it's getting harder to reach people. The sample is slightly biased. It's got more old people, white people, wealthy, educated, and some of them are sort of correlate in some ways. So it's a little bit biased, but not so much. I mean, there are the good results that we can base off, but we have this caveat that we can apply to it whenever we look at the results. So we published this paper based on the results, and I will talk about some of the stuff from the paper. Okay, so this was one of the questions, and based on last week's discussion, funding versus financing. Do you remember?
Oh, right.
Rick
We
tried
should
to
have said finance.
Yeah, so I in the paper I described it as financing, but in the question I wrote it as funding, and then now I think it's a combination of the two, because I think he mentioned like the federal funds, if they come to you, that's sort of funding, and other mechanisms are financing. So it's a mix of funding and financing, and I need to figure that out, what exactly, how to unpack it and how to use one term for this. So I just wanted to present it as I had written it in the paper. So we, obviously the question was not structured this way. It was more descriptive, water and sewer projects, and we gave some examples, are expensive, and over time the federal government has been paying, but that has shifted to local governments. Going forward, what do you think? Who do you think should pay for these, for funding these projects? That was the question. The options were federal government, state, and local, and then private corporations. So here's the quiz. Can anybody come up with a distribution? Or at least which one was most favored?
State government was the highest.
Okay. Any other dissenting voices? There are only 4 options. So. Okay, all right. Okay. Yes, so local government was 40% of the respondents nationally, and then it went in the order of local, state, federal, and then private corporations. I was actually surprised to see private corporations sort of low on this list, because I thought maybe people would want in some way.
So this is what they want it to be?
This is what they want.
This
This is what they wanted to be, and they could only pick one. So this is what they wanted to be. And so if you analyze the results, and try to understand, and we get the demographic data, so we know who is, are they Republican, identifying as a Republican, are they, what's their age, where do they live roughly, like a zip code sort of area. So there are some demographic details that are available, and you can match that and try to understand what kind of people are picking, a certain option versus the other. And basically, we see that people who identify as Republicans, those who have long tenure residence, been living in a certain location, have higher income, they favor state government over the federal government. And the way you do the analysis, you pick one as a reference and then try to run some regressions. So, and then there are details hidden within each analysis, but the point that sort of jumps out is that people who identify as Republicans, they have really strong preferences on this issue. Like everybody else have some preferences, but that are not consistent. But those who identify as Republicans, they have so strong preferences. It exactly matches this list in that order. So they prefer private corporation over local, over state, over federal. So federal government is like the least preferred. You could, I don't know, that would be their really last order of preference. But then they prefer private corporations. But that's not seen in the rest of the sample, because it's showing up at such a small number, 13%. So that's one pattern that you see consistent, and other things are seen here and there but not consistent throughout this. So
that mean that your survey didn't have many Republicans in it?
No, doesn't mean that. Why?
Is it
Well, no, because you were
13%?
just saying that if it actually comes out strongly that the Republicans always are favoring private, and then private's the lowest on the, in the sample.
Right.
So, but were they fairly?
They were representative, yes, but they're not the majority in any case. It's about 29%, I think, nationally people identify as Republicans, so it's consistent. I think politically the sample was pretty evenly spread out.
Well, yeah, because you had unidentified.
It's a spectrum. It's not one versus the other. So strongly Republican, moderately Republican, independent, then moderately Democrat, strongly Democrat. So there is this spread, and so actually it's a 7-point scale. I only gave you 5, I think. So there's one in between. So, and I tried to do Republicans, including all the moderates and everything, and keep the independents separate, and then you include the leaners in one way. So you can splice and dice the data multiple ways. Both ways it's the same. People who identify as Republicans or those who lean towards Republican Party, that philosophy come out that way. But there's another data points to sort of counter that a little bit. And it's from a different data set. So this is looking at statewide ballot initiatives that were proposed in any state in the US during this time frame, 2001 to 2012. There were about 25 of them, and all of them, the ones I picked, were statewide. They were not regional or local. And 22 of them were successful. So that's a pretty high success rate. And these were things that included financing, we have to pay for some infrastructure project, or in general, there was like this open call sort of on the ballot saying that we need to have this, money raised through taxes, or, there's some means that needs to be, so the electorate has to allow the state government to do something so that they can pay for, a new project or maintaining old projects. Some sort of wording was in the ballot, and they had to go and vote on election day. That was the criteria we had. So, it's a high success rate, and if you look at the administrations that actually put those ballots on, put those questions on the ballot, they were, a good mix, Republican, Democrat, Independent. So at the state level, there is still this acceptance that, infrastructure projects are acceptable. They need money, and we will raise money in some way. So that's something that comes out. So state level, state government, there is some acceptance, and if you look at the electorate, it's sort of spread out. Some people want the federal government, some people want the local government. So it's a mix of different responses, and it seems like just based on this limited question, there is going to be an acceptance based on which part of the electorate you're asking for any government level involvement in those projects. Okay, so the next question we had was who's best suited to manage wastewater treatment plants, water treatment plants. And again, the question was long worded, but I'll give you the choices so you have the next quiz. Private corporations are best suited to manage this task. Second was public water and sewer boards are best suited to manage this task. And C was both are equally suited to manage this task. And the task was running your water and sewer operations. So any guesses here? 3 options. So I've cut down one of the options.
Both.
Makes it easier.
Both.
Both. Okay.
I'm gonna go with both.
Both. Okay. You are thinking how the American electorate thinks. You should run for office.
Yeah.
Yes. So the majority, not majority, a plurality. It's not the majority. It's the highest response. 44% think that both are equally suited. Public water and sewer boards score about twice as much as the private corporations. So again, we see a consistent trend based on both the questions. So private corporations are not seen in good light in general. If you just pose a very generic
Except
question.
that 18%.
Yeah, there is 18%. I'm not denying that, but it's still not reaching a threshold where everybody, you can say that a majority or a strong section of the people feel that way, just based on this limited questionnaire, obviously. And the questions are also very generic in some way. We don't know whom we are reaching, what kind of systems they use, where they live. We don't know much information about them. So it's meant to be taken in a very generic sense. So that's our general response. You notice that there are a lot of people who pick the middle option, and there are some ways to interpret this middle option. There are not too many. I don't have the detailed response. So there are, you can say that they are genuinely indifferent. They either don't care. That's the simplistic way of saying indifferent. If you like economists use indifferent as like either or, both are okay. So that's another way of using indifferent. So you can classify that choice either as indifferent, ambivalent. There's good to both, both good and bad to both of these systems, and we just don't know how, we don't know which one outweighs the other. That's one way of interpreting. And the third one is they're either too inexperienced or unaware of any of how they just don't know enough information to make this decision. So that's basically how you could interpret, and we don't have enough information to make an assertive claim as to why they fall into this category. There is some market research that shows that people who are unsure of selecting their choice, are not too confident, they pick the middle option. So that's just sort of giving some context, and I'm not maybe helping this, but in the survey response, people who were less educated and women picked the middle option. So just saying, that's no way to interpret that. But I also noticed, both of you said both, both are equally suited. So that's what I found in the survey. Those are the only two groups that picked the middle option significantly over each of the other options. And again, there are different groups that picked one versus the other. Not so surprising. Party affiliation and ideology was pretty consistent. Republicans, again, they picked privatized, ownership or management as a strong preference over the other options. And one of the other explanations could be that there's relative inexperience with privatization. There are not too many people who are served by private water or sewer companies in the US. There are only about 12 publicly traded private companies, so those are sort of big companies, and they operate in 42 states. So there are a few states that they don't operate. I'm guessing those are maybe smaller states. But of the 8 states that are not served by private companies, 5 are in the West, and that's one of the regions that had a strong preference for public management, and that could be because there's a heavy federal government and state government sort of, it's a different structure. It's not as decentralized in terms of the local decision making. The Bureau of Land Management, the Interior Department, Bureau of Reclamation, I think they're heavily involved in these public projects. So it's possible that there is some of that going on. Again, without having much information as to who's making that specific choice, we cannot say why they are making that choice. But this is sort of an overall view. And the literature is pretty inconclusive on the effect of privatization on efficiency. So they've looked at different studies, and in some cases there is, this privatization helps in cutting down the cost and improving services. In some it doesn't. So overall, if you look at the overall effect, it's not significantly one way or the other. So that's just to add some context to how privatization is seen. So that sort of helps you. I mean, if people are aware, people are making a rational decision, that might also help you understand why they're making these kinds of choices, and that's driven by some information they have. In other cases, they probably don't have enough information. Okay, and the final question we asked was, what's on some scale of 1 to 7, how concerned are you about your infrastructure? And again, the question was worded generally, how concerned are you about the state of pipes and treatment plants used to provide water and manage sewage in your community? So this was specifically in their community, not about any generic question, any generic scenario. And they were sort of spread out. 1 is the low level of concern, 7 is the highest concern. And it sort of splits down. If you draw a line there, 50% on both sides they pick. So there's sort of an even spread, no strong feelings, I would say, on this issue. And this is surprising because there was one company that did Xylem, ITT Xylem. That's a I think water company. They did a survey 2 years back, and it was highly sort of publicized everywhere. and they had questions on this topic and other topics. That's possibly why I was interested in looking at this, because their survey was biased, poorly worded, wrongly interpreted. Like all possible things you can find in that survey, you could find. For example, one of their questions was, so on this specific one, how concerned are you? They had the same question, they gave only 4 options, not very concerned, not concerned, somewhat, and very concerned. So those were their options. And in that 74% of the respondents chose the first 2 options, like the more concerned sort of options. We didn't find that. So in our survey, we find a more equal split. But they found that people were very concerned, so they just sort of hyped that up, saying that, oh, people are concerned. And a similar question with our government, sort of who should do it. They had a different worded question, but they have the same options, and they said, oh, there's the federal government, there's the state, there's the local, and the private. Now, obviously, I think their response was along the same lines. So if you total up the state, federal, and local, it added up to some 80% something. They said, oh, 80% of the people want the government to take some action, because you gave 3 different options as government, but then only 1 as private. So it's just a different. They just wrongly interpreted their own responses. So that was one of the reasons we sort of picked that question, and we don't see the results that they got. So it's more like that people are either somewhat concerned, and again it breaks down demographically. There are certain people who are more concerned, and those are, let's see, suburban, single, and older respondents are more concerned. Republicans and white respondents less so. Suburban respondents, I think that's a little bit surprising, because you expect that people who live in the cities to be more concerned, because cities have older infrastructure, they were settled much longer, so they have old pipes, they have more main breaks and things happening. So you would expect the urban respondents to be more concerned, but this was a little bit of an opposite. And that, I think, again, there's no way to understand why people are making that decision, but if you were to rationalize it, water and wastewater services in the suburban areas cost more per lot than they do in urban areas, because they're more dense, urban areas. Suburban areas are more spread out, so it does cost a lot in terms of unit cost, because you need to extend pipes and have pumping stations and things like that. They also have larger plot sizes and lawn, so in general their water bills are higher. So that could be also driving their concern. Another possibility is that people in the suburban sample include people who rely on wells and septic systems, who are not, in general, not the audience that we are trying to reach in this survey, but they are generally more aware of water issues, because they are, they're doing their own maintenance, or maybe not, but they're in charge of their systems at least. So that gives them some ownership on these systems. So that drives their concern. And what we did also was we combined the city and the suburban responses to try to see if maybe combining them as a metro area, does that help us understand something. So we combined some of their responses and tried to match it up with some existing survey data. And one of them was a Gallup index of well-being that is conducted across metro regions. And they just generally ask, do you think your quality of life is, high? And they also have a water question, your availability, accessibility to clean water or something. So we had that. And then I think some other newspaper did a survey of rates across metropolitan areas over a 10-year period, and see how the rates have been going up. And so if you match all this data, the concern level is high when your rates are going up more than the others, and you also respond low on the Gallup poll, saying that your city has, gives you access to clean water. So the level of concern is not some, just out there question people. It's not a hypothetical. It is correlated with how they are noticing their water rates go up or go up less or more in proportion, and also their general awareness of water issues in the community. So, I mean, sometimes some of these questions get a bad rap, saying, these are hypotheticals. They may be, but people give their responses keeping in mind other factors that they are observing. So I think there is a little bit of context that you can bring to those questions.
Sure, yeah, and I'm thinking the older people, they are also maybe more sensitive to the rates going up. Because they may
That-
remember when
yeah.
rates were a lot less.
Right,
Whereas if
right.
you're just in your 20s and 30s, it
Right.
may-
That actually also brings me to this poorly done survey, the Xylem. No, I'm not going to give
I'll
it
say,
up.
one quick comment too. I feel like people in the suburbs have a dramatically over-heightened sense of risk compared to people in the cities.
Quite possible. And the way I was going to tie up this other survey, not to beat down that point, the respondent sample that they took was based on the 2006 elections, and they also took just the voters. So 2006 is like a midterm poll. There's a certain type of people who come to the midterm polls,
Yeah.
older people who are more concerned. People who are more passionate about some of these elections and things. So in general, I mean, there is a rationality behind why suburban older people. I mean, if you poll like this, 2006 electorate or midterm electorate saying that granny and grandpa are pipes are crumbling, what do you think? Are you concerned? Like, yeah. so there is a certain you can make your results look a certain way by choosing your own sample. But even otherwise, I think there are some of these factors going on in terms of how people respond, what kind of information they are getting from their local municipalities, newspapers, things like that. Which sort of transitions us into the next segment. But if people have questions, I can take them. No, okay. I'll move on, and we can have time at the end.
So, was the age distribution pretty even on this?
Uh,
On the survey that you guys did, the Cornell one?
Okay, so I think age distribution as in the...
As in, like, were there more older
Yes,
respondents?
there were older respondents, yes. Because again, some of it is hard to avoid because older respondents are more at home. So if you're trying to reach them, they are more likely to pick up there. So they follow a certain well-accepted method called random digit dialing, which makes it sort of an even probability that somebody, anybody has an equal chance at being offered entry into the survey. But a lot of times there are no responses, and you get a hit with older people who are at home. So that's hard to avoid.
So they don't do anything by email yet?
No. Although email responses also have gotten much better in terms of sampling. So I think Amazon has a new program called MTurk. I just recently found out, which gives people these questions. There's like a pool of people, and then they have their demographic information and everything already entered into the system. And so you can tell them, I want a certain demographic if you want, or if you just want a general audience, then it'll pull, just based on random chance and allow them to participate. And it's gotten much better than, because earlier online surveys used to be about wealthy young people, people who have access to internet. So now that's changing a little bit. Yes.
I was wondering for the level of concern, could that be linked to zip codes or anything? So if you look at the people who said they were more concerned, did they maybe live in areas that had higher rates of water main breaks or things like that?
That's possible. You could do that.
The water infrastructure is so kind of invisible, unless you have a reason for concern. People probably aren't concerned because you turn on the tap and the water comes out. Then you turn on the tap and the water doesn't come out. Then they go. There are problems.
Right. So that's you can do that. Although you would need local information for each zip code, or at least the big zip codes.
Yeah.
So that's possible. Yes. We didn't do that.
So you could ask them that in the survey if they were aware of any.
Yeah, we could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, with this kind of survey, you have very few options of getting through to them. You have only 3 questions, and it has to be written certain way. Otherwise, they discard the whole thing. Because we submitted questions last year, we didn't get it. So that happens. So it's possible. So yeah. So that sort of brings us to the next half or so of this presentation, which is on looking at media discourse on some of the similar issues. They're not the same. It's not exactly well matched with the survey, but again, it sort of builds on this decentralization of local infrastructure decision making, and how news media sets the national discourse. It influences opinion. It's decreasing. The influence is decreasing, but still newspapers are significant even in small communities where they have access to 1 or 2 newspapers that set the tone, that present issues. influence behavior. And we didn't find any significant number of studies that have investigated, this media discourse on aging infrastructure. There are a lot of studies that look at specific water issues in a community, if like, a dam was being demolished or a new project, a new school is being built. I mean, there are lots of studies that look at those kinds of issues, specific one project issues, but not in an overall discourse. So we don't have like, a lot of studies to base this on, but came up with certain hypotheses. One is that media coverage will focus on individual events, so there's some specific, accidents, main breaks, things like that. Those are specific events. And in general, we wanted to study patterns in coverage, like what kind of spatial patterns do we see? Does it change over time? Do the articles provide descriptions of what's happening? Whenever they write about certain incidents, what kind of details do they give, contextual information, for the readers to make sense of why a certain thing might be happening. So we took two specific topics. One was the water main break, and the second was increases in water and sewer rates. So obviously you can see that one is probably connected to the other. If you have more water main breaks, and that sort of relates to an aging, old infrastructure which needs to be fixed, your water rates could go up. So again, it's not a direct connection, it's plausible. To observe it over time, we did that over 14 years, and that 14 years is again not initially well thought out, but the idea was to cover enough time, 10 years or so, that gives you a good span, but also cover some of the major events that have happened in the last decade that have influenced our thinking on infrastructure management. So the 2005 tornado, the cyclone in Katrina in New Orleans. So that's one. I mean, Sandy was the most recent, but that was the biggest natural disaster in the last decade. Then there was the 2003 blackout in the North American, and Canada, US. That was one. The 9/11 attacks. So those were one. Before that, Y2K. So we wanted to go back and then stop at some point. So 1999 was, we decided that was a good enough time to stop, because that covers Y2K and all the subsequent events that happened. And we used 2 students who read all the articles, so it involves a lot of effort. I worked with a faculty in the Department of Communication, so we tried to do this involving students from that department. So the idea is to pick up news articles and try to sample them, because we found too many articles. So the consistent pattern in all the charts that follow are, the red is water and sewer rate increases, blue is water main breaks. So that's the pattern we'll follow in all other charts. So you see that there are more articles that talk about water and sewer rates than water main breaks. And there are a lot. I mean, each year you get more than 1,000 articles, and they seem to be going up every year. The black and gray lines are just 3-year averages, so that just smooths out the variations, year-to-year variations. And so the idea was to get about 500 articles in each topic, so we can read them and not have to go through 17,000 articles, which is what we got in each of those topics. And again, the way you try to use you try to use common simple terms, but then they also end up catching some articles that don't have any connection to the topic. So at some point we were looking for, we had a third topic on boiled water advisories, boiled water notices. We didn't pursue that, but one of the articles was on boiling water to make pasta. Not kidding. That was the article. So there are those kinds of articles that creep in, and they had to be discarded. So there was a coding sheet that had to be developed, and certain articles that don't discuss the main point sort of dropped out. So from the 500 odd articles, we ended up with 400 odd articles on each topic. And this is from Google Trends, I think. Google News. It analyzes Google News. And that's not to make any significant point, only to say that the surprise that I had that the rate increases articles were more than the water main breaks is seen even in the Google News. So that's not something that is only specific to the way we picked out articles. That seems to be the case. So the first level of analysis was trying to combine all the articles from each state and do like a state level analysis. I'll maybe stop in 5 minutes and have some time for questions. So we looked at water main break articles and had few variables for each state. The ones that are significant were the articles were found in states that had low population growth and also had high income. So that's one thing. The water and sewer rate articles, on the other hand, were seen in low income states and states that also had high water main break. So those two are obviously very connected. The state level correlation was pretty high, but you also see that they were seen in states which had low income, so that's a double whammy. Not only are the states actually poor in general, they also seem to be experiencing more increases. Statehood year, which is like a poor proxy for how old the cities were. Again, if you were to do it in a more methodical way, you would do it by each city, but we didn't do that. And governorship control with Republicans that had no influence. We did do spatial analysis. That might give you a little bit of a better explanation. So that's total number of articles for all the 14 years. And the darker color, and those are, yeah, the darkest is more than 30. California and Pennsylvania are showing up as the states with most number of articles. But then if you move on to transposing that number by articles per million population, that changes a little bit. So you see a few clusters. So there is one cluster here, which is all the northeastern, sort of eastern seaboard states. And then the second cluster, which is the plain states. Not sure why the plain states actually show high on that. So that's one. And then if we
So,
yep. And then yes.
I'm sorry, I'm confused about this data.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's where the article was published?
It was
Or
where the
where?
article was focused on, not
Okay.
published. Yeah. So if a New York Times article published from New York talks about North Dakota, it
Okay.
should be quoted as North Dakota, some city in North Dakota. And if you tease out the cities that showed up with this high number of articles were relative to their population, these were the cities that popped up. Albany makes an appearance, yay. Topeka, Manchester, so except this one city, Quincy, all the other cities are either the state capitals or the largest city in their respective states. So there is, so those things show up. So old cities and maybe more populated or more early settled cities have some connection with this main breaks. Okay, similar map, water and sewer rate increases. Very different. Even the total number of articles, the spread is more even if you look at the shading on the map. And if you do the same analysis, which is dividing by million population, you get a different, somewhat similar here. So some of the plain states show up here. West Virginia and South Carolina, they pop out. They had actually the highest, if you just look at the absolute numbers. So small states, but they had most number of, and poor states, they had the highest number of articles. And Maine actually shows up pretty high, even both. So they had more main breaks and increases in water rates. As far as towns, it's a different set of towns. I don't know where Fitchburg, Massachusetts is. So those kinds of towns. So it's a mix of small towns, old industrial towns, somewhat different from the water main break analysis. Seasonality. If you, I arbitrarily divided the time 3 months. December to February was winter, and then every subsequent 3 months was the next season. You have somewhat, so they sort of peak in winter and summer, the water main break articles, but you don't see as much a trend in the water and sewer rates. You don't see that. And if you actually read the articles and try to quote them as to what was the factor, was weather the factor? Not so much. Actually, 65% of the articles had no reason. They didn't mention anything. There was a main break, done. Yeah, done. Like, go home. No explanation as to why it happened. Weather was as much likely a reason as accident. So somebody took some kind of a heavy equipment, and they were fixing a main break somewhere. They were doing doing the work, one of the public works official, they just happen to damage another pipe or something. So those kinds of accidents, or it may not be related to the public work, somebody else, there was a car crash or something that led to a main break. So those kinds of reasons. That is as likely as the weather. So age and those are sort of minor reasons. Somewhat different in the water and sewer rates. Budget shortfall, infrastructure upgrades. Those were cited as primary reasons. No reason was given in only a fifth of the articles, and there were some others that talked about augmenting the water supply and things like that. So you see that you're starting to see a different coverage of the water main break articles and the rate increases. There's some context that's being provided in the rate increases articles. If you dig into more, 50% of the articles talk about where the break happened. Some of them give the names of the utility. Details sort of go down, and some of it is not a fault of the news media, but it's just that city officials don't know age of the broken pipe was not available. So there's some of that going on. I think I should wrap up soon. Some of the articles talked about how much, half of the articles at least mentioned percent increase in rates. They talked about who was the utility, so that helps you maybe understand what's the geographic coverage of the rate increase. So if you live in a city but you're not served by a certain utility, that sort of helps you understand the context. And then increases per customer, and that sort of drops down. We also had connection to aging infrastructure, which was also a sort of a sub-focus of this analysis, was to identify how these topics, how these news articles are connected to aging infrastructure. It's not that commonly seen. I mean, about 13 to 20% is what you see in news articles. I'm going to just go pretty quickly on that. News media relies on few sources. Water and sewer rate articles had 1.17, that's the mean number of quotes per article. That was significantly more than the water main breaks. And majority of the quotes were provided by public utility officials. Some citizens and experts were a pretty small fraction. There were some differences in cause attribution. And this is not from my research. There is a similar study, some master's thesis, and they basically said academics and federal officials cite internal causes. That is, there was the age of the pipe or something wrong with the utility itself. Whereas the utilities were always citing external sources, saying the weather was the problem, somebody else damaged it, there were no funds to maintain. Something that sort of shifts the focus away from them, but the academics were putting the blame on the utility. So there was this difference in how they were interpreting the same information, and by providing few experts, you're sort of tilting the balance in how you present these data and opinions. Okay, I will skip through that maybe and talk about the results from the aging infrastructure connection. So the aging infrastructure connection articles, again, I read the articles in detail to see what's the connection they're making. The connections were weak to non-existent. They were, overall not seen, but in the ones that you do see the articles talking about this aging infrastructure connection, they talk about economic issues, especially in water main breaks. They start out with, they have these issues with the money at the local government level, the funds have dried. So they talk about some of these issues, and that focus becomes stronger as we move through the 14 years. The second half, there was the stimulus funds, the ASCE came with its report on drinking water, there was some capital hearings, senators were called, and people were talking about what's happening. So there's some focus that happens that puts it in an economic perspective. Whereas the water and sewer rate articles always have that perspective. When they talk about aging infrastructure, they talk about the fact that our pipes are breaking, we need to fix things. They put it in a larger context. They also make the connection that we need money for that, so that's why we need to raise our rates. And so there is a little bit of a difference that you see in how these articles are covered and what kind of perspective they give. Except California, all the states were east of Mississippi River, so those are states that talk about aging infrastructure connection, with respect to their water systems. I think I'll stop here. Questions?
Did the articles indicate that people were, let me rephrase. Did you see certain frequencies of articles during different times of year? Was that your previous slide?
Yeah,
And
that's
then-
that's this. Just we looked at seasonality, just broad.
And how about across the time? Were they becoming more frequent as
Related to certain events.
Oh,
sorry,
year to
this
year.
isn't that, like, so,
By
you know,
year.
from by year, so 1999.
By year, I didn't do that by
2012.
year. I just grouped
Okay.
all of them together. Didn't do that. I mean, that's one way. So there has been there is a study from UK, a little bit old, that matches up the water main breaks actual incidences to the temperature, mean temperature data, and some other controls, and they see a pretty nice connection with the mean temperature data.
I'm just wondering, yeah, maybe if you could see like with political cycles, or if there were other
Yeah, so I mean,
issues that
we
would tie
could do
into
that. I don't know
diversity.
how strong the, that kind of a model would be, given that, it's once you spread it out over so many years and across space,
Yeah.
it becomes pretty, you have one article here, one article there. It's not, you need to group them in some way to do that.
So Sri, I mean, it sounds like they could be doing a better job of reporting.
They could be doing better job. So I think, I mean,
They're saying newspapers could be better.
Yeah, yep, that's a novel conclusion. So this is sort of my final thought. Public infrastructure issues are inherently complex. They're not easy to understand, and so one way to interpret that is based on this small sort of study. Public is unaware, indecisive, cares little, based on some of the responses that we saw. But you can also say that they have certain beliefs, they lack information, and the media doesn't provide them, this balanced opinion and sort of objective information. So either way, media has a role in facilitating the citizen-government relationship and strengthening that connection with local issues. So I think that's where I think media has a role. Whether it would do that and whether that would help people make better decisions, we don't know. That's a separate topic on how people take objective data and still process it the way they want to. That happens.
Anybody else?
Any other questions?
Thanks, Ray.
Thank you.